Hey, everybody, this is Brett Ingram, and this is the optYOUmize podcast, the show that helps entrepreneurs build their dream business and dream life. Today, we're talking with Jurriaan Kamer, organizational change expert, co founder of Unblock, a modern management consultancy, keynote speaker, and author of leadership books. I'm super excited about this because change is the only constant in business and in life. So we need to be prepared to adapt and always get more efficient. So with that, welcome Yuri and thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Brett. I'm very excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited too. You have a really interesting background and focus in terms of what you do. I think it's super relevant, especially in today's day and age. So I have a ton of stuff that I want to talk to you about, but can we start off a little bit with your background? Give us a sense of how did you start your career?
Yeah, so I started out as a software developer. Actually, I was an IT nerd, especially when we got access to the internet very early on, when that wasn't a thing yet. Can you imagine that? Yeah, I was always good with people as well, and suddenly became a project manager and started leading software developers and software and teams of software developers. And so I increasingly became interested not necessarily with how to create good software, but how do we create organizations that are able to create great products for clients, and how do you lead? So for the last decade, I've been even more interested in how do I help leaders become better at their work.
So interesting. So it was sort of a natural evolution because you started there and then you recognized. I'll tell you a funny story. So in the late 90s, I was working for a tech consulting company, and I was not a consultant, but my job was to manage the consultants that we had on the East Coast of the United States.
Hmm.
And so the reason my role was created and my entire function in the business is because they recognize the challenges with the disconnect sometimes between creating technical things like software and the people side of the business. So
Yeah.
you had our sales team that did all the sales, and then you had our consultants that were out in the field at various, consulting engagements doing their thing, but they had to report to the managers for the businesses that they were consulting for. And those people needed some way to sort of manage it all together. And so it was interesting because I was sort of the in between. So I saw firsthand sometimes the disconnect between the genius that you'll see somebody have and the difficulty of somehow being able to put that together in a way
Yeah.
where it works within an organization. So definitely a super important function. Um, so if we're looking at this broadly, what do you think, just from the perspective of organizations themselves, what do
Hmm.
you think the future of organizations are going to look like? Because I know, there's been a history, and now there's with all this technology, there's been a lot of evolution. So where do you see that headed?
Yeah, it's a great question, and this episode might age really quickly. We have no idea, to be honest, what especially the wave of AI is going to do to organizations. There are definitely things to consider. I think a lot of the work of managers, interestingly, is setting priorities, dividing people and resources, and allocating that, cascading priorities and strategies. And I think some of that work can be automated, and there are already companies out there that are doing it. I recently saw some information about how Tesla is operating in some of their manufacturing areas, where it's literally a computer that is telling people to if the problem they're working on is valuable enough or not. And if the computer is calculating, the people that are working on this particular problem, they are trying to optimize this metric, and they're using too much people and too much time and too much material. So this is no longer an ROI positive problem they're working on. So the computer is just telling them, go find another problem to solve. And it literally is that flexible. People just move throughout the organization and figure out the most valuable problem to solve without any human intervention with that. So yeah, there's a lot that might happen when that happens. At the same time, most of the management models and methodologies that we have were invented in the industrial revolution, where we were literally just trying to scale up our production in our factories. And even though we are already far away from that, some of those practices still exist. So I don't know how quickly the change is going to go.
Yeah, it's a challenge because obviously you have people that, depending on when you were born, you have very different standards and expectations and a history of the way things used to work. I mean,
Mm.
when I was a kid, the whole idea was IBM was this big company, but everybody wore either a blue or a black suit with a red tie. Like they had dress
Yeah.
codes, and it was crazy. And then you fast forward, and it's funny because in the late '90s, I had actually the very first version of the BlackBerry that was ever
Mm-hmm.
created
Mm-hmm.
before cell phones. And I thought, even instinctively, using this thing at home, because I had to be able to connect with the consultants, they were out in the field all over the place. So they had access to me and they're working 24/7. And so one of the first things I realized is, as cool as this gadget was, I told my wife I used to call it my digital leash because it would just buzz and buzz and buzz.
Yeah.
And it's like people had access. I intuitively recognized the fact that while there's a convenience of it, there's also sort of an annoyance of it because
Yeah.
you don't ever have that separation anymore. And I think we blurred the lines in so many ways. And then, of course, you have COVID, where it forced everybody to work from home.
Yeah.
And that changed the paradigm and forced people to rethink the way they were doing it. And I know, like, even locally here, restaurants that decoded that fast ended up getting burgeoning takeout businesses that now that they've recovered are exploding.
Yeah.
And other restaurants went under because they didn't adjust fast enough and they couldn't seat people in the restaurant anymore. And so
Yep.
you could see the pace of change keeps increasing. So from a managerial standpoint, I know I've had very mixed experiences myself with managers.
Yeah.
People have probably seen me mixed ways as a manager when I was in that role as well. Do you think that that's just an unnecessary layer of the organization, or do you think that they are necessary to allocate resources and keep priorities going?
Um, it really depends on the type of organization you are. The work of managers will continue to exist, although it might take different forms. So I, for about 7 years, I left. I left last year, but for about 7 years, I was part of a fully self-managing consultancy. We had 50 people in different places of the world, mostly US, and we grew from when I joined we were with 5 people, and when I left we were at 50, and we were completely self-managing. So there was nobody was reporting to no one. But the work of finding ways to move projects along, finding ways to discuss what needs to happen, finding ways how to build the team, to improve the team, to create cohesion, that work still existed. And we found ways to do that without having a formalized role of manager. And there's a lot of companies out there that are experimenting with different forms of self-management. AI we already talked about, but the work has to exist. If you're putting a group of people together, for them to create something cohesive that is more than the sum of its parts, there needs to be people that are looking from a broad perspective, like a bird's eye view of what's going to happen. And it's helpful if they, or somehow the system, creates clarity about what is the most valuable thing we should chase after and what are we not going to do.
Yeah, no, that certainly makes sense. I'm curious as to your thoughts about work days and work weeks.
Hmm.
So at least in the United States, the typical thing has always been 5 days a week for work,
Yeah.
8 hours a day. But if you're on a salary in a salaried position, oftentimes it's more than that. Sometimes people take things home. But I know I've seen studies, and I'm not an expert in any of this, but I've seen studies where they've experimented with 4 days. I know some of the companies here will do 4 days, 10 hours a day, and
Yeah.
then 3 days off. What is your experience or take on sort of what the ideal situation is with a work week for productivity?
Yeah. I think less hours is more productive. It's I mean I'm in the Netherlands, in Europe, so our perspective on work hours is very different from what is the default in the US, for sure. But I've seen people work long hours and being into work all the time, but not being so effective. This idea of counting hours at the workplace is archaic in itself. It comes from the time where we when we were literally working along the factory, the manufacturing lines, and we had to punch in and punch out, and that actually determined how much money we get paid. These days, most of our work is knowledge work, right? Where we are highly trained professionals. We are fully capable of deciding how we're going to best do our work. Of course, we have to align that and discuss that with our colleagues, with our leader, with whatever is helpful. But we don't necessarily need to be told what to do and when to do it. So the idea of we have to be in the office for so many hours is just strange to me. And I think in the period of COVID, we proved that people can completely self-manage, especially if people had kids at home and had to homeschool them. Families families and humans in general are just super creative. They can figure out how to achieve outcomes without needing to be in a physical place all the time.
Yeah, I totally agree. Because I've found even with myself, one of the things is my work rhythm will vary. I tend to work very well in focused, which I think is pretty common, right?
Yeah,
I tend to work really well in focused bursts where I can get a lot done and be really productive. If I continue to try to do that without taking breaks or unplugging from what I'm doing, I can feel my own productivity slip.
yeah,
My mind starts to wander. I'm not focused anymore. And so sitting there being chained to a desk is sort of, to me, silly. The other thing is,
yeah,
even in times of day, for whatever reason, for me, the middle of the afternoon, and again, I think this is common, but the middle of the afternoon is my weak point. My
yeah,
productivity, my energy is not great. In the evening, I actually perk up. I actually work really well in the evening and early night,
yeah,
as well as in the morning. And so I would prefer to take the middle of the day off and work in those
yeah.
times if possible.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think people are smart enough and can be trusted to do the right thing. Everybody wants to, some people will say, well, if we let go of those constraints, how can we be sure that they are actually working and not fooling around? Again, like in COVID times, we had ways of trusting people, and we had to, and it worked, right? So um, I think it's all about setting expectations with your colleagues. So if you are part of a team or you're dependent on a few people or some people are dependent on you, just have those conversations. Just say like, you know what, I have to pick up my kids at these times, and I just want to spend my time with my family between 5 and 7, and before and after I'm going to work a few hours. If it's really urgent, send me a text. I'll immediately pick up the phone and we'll be there. But it's about setting boundaries and being human through this period of our lifetime, right?
So, do you think some of this is an element of corporate culture? And what I mean by that is, the sense to me, just intuitively, when somebody is in a situation where they need to be monitored or the company feels that way, it
Yeah,
almost feels to me as though they inherently don't trust the people that they're working for.
yeah,
Whereas in other organizations, there's that sense of trust and you just know it's going to get done. And I've been in high performing teams before where for me, no one needed to tell me what to do because I didn't want to let my teammates down. I
yeah,
knew how hard they were working. We all had the same goal. And so I wasn't going to be the one that came unprepared. I wasn't going to be the one that didn't do my work. And there was nobody telling me what to do.
yeah.
So do you think that's a function of culture in a company?
Yeah, I think that's true, and I think it's also a matter of how clear are the outcomes that you're going after, and how much autonomy do you or your team have to figure out how to achieve that outcome. And it's a scale. So if those things are low, then the default is, well, we have to be there because we need to tell people what to do, and we have to monitor their output. Rather than, let's talk about what you and your team are trying to achieve in the next quarter. And and if that's clear for everyone and we're all okay with that, just go and do it. And doesn't matter how many hours you work or how little hours you work, as long as you can achieve that and you can create transparency about your progress, then you go do that. And that is I think the highest form of I call it in my book aligned autonomy. a sense of high alignment, but also high autonomy, and that's how fast moving, innovative organizations work. It's based on that idea, and so that has big implications of how we work as a team. At the same time, like it is super useful to be in the office sometimes and to create these moments of improvised connection, where it's like, you bump into someone and you want to maximize the possibility of ideas to spread randomly. But we also have to be careful that we're not excluding a group of people that either joined the company during COVID and don't have the expectation to be in the office. You have to really think of how work happens and what type of organization you want to be in order for you to achieve that speed and agility that we all need.
Yeah, and on your point about the sort of information sharing and the sense of community and connection, I have to tell you, being an entrepreneur for the last 17 years and doing it largely alone at
Hmm.
home, I mean, I had a lot of colleagues in business, but we would only see each other a couple times a year. And that was one of the elements that for me really I felt missing.
Hmm.
Yes, I had total control over my schedule. I was making more money than I was making when I was working corporate, all those other things. But at the same time, I was lonely
Yeah.
because I didn't have that same level of connection. And, it's interesting to me because when I worked in companies where we had small groups or teams, or maybe the company was even small, I always felt when I think back on those opportunities in those places, there was something great about the chemistry and just the whole vibe of being there. We were sort of all in it together. And most of the smaller places I worked, it was sort of a bullpen type situation where we didn't have high walls or cubicles. It was
Hmm.
all just an open floor plan.
Yeah.
And I actually thought that worked fantastically well
Yeah.
in terms of building a corporate culture and having people, get to know each other and connect more.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. So
um,
you need both. You need this. If we're all just working from home, it's possible. Like there's companies out there, for example, GitLab, that was already a fully remote company before COVID happened, which has tremendous upsides in terms of being able to hire globally, being forced from the start of the company to build the systems so work can happen mostly asynchronously. At the same time, in order to create social cohesion, they do encourage people to travel to other colleagues and spend a week with them, and they pay for that. They don't have the burden and cost of an office, like these huge buildings that we need to somehow buy and rent out. Those are expensive things, and you can reallocate that budget completely if you say, you know what, here's a travel budget. Go and travel to the other side of the world and spend a week or a month with your colleagues, and it's all paid for. And they also, from the beginning, organized full weeks where they got the whole company together. They're too big to do that now, but like I visited one of their early on retreats, and they rent out a big house in the city center of Amsterdam or New York or wherever, and they get 50 colleagues to work together for a week, so that these connections, when you cook together, when you eat together, when you drink together, you get a different type of social cohesion, and that goes a long way. Like after you've done that for a week, you can go another half year to do it before doing it again.
exactly. When you have that human connection, it builds that relationship in a way that those are memories that you hold on to, but it
Yeah.
also bonds people to the organization because
Yeah.
people want to be in a sense of community where they feel like they belong and that they
Yeah.
like the other people that are there. So,
Yeah.
so everyone can relate to that meeting or new company initiative that seems like a waste of time. As a leader, how can we eliminate that stuff or at least change the perception of, okay, if we're rolling out something new or we got to have a meeting that is going to be a waste of time for people?
I think smart leaders acknowledge that before setting such goals or giving those directives, they talk to their people first to figure out, is this even valuable? Is this worth pursuing? Am I missing something? What are the perspectives of others? Especially if you have an idea and others need to execute, go and talk to these people before you decide that you're going to do that. And that's one of the reasons why I'm not a big proponent of strategy cascades, goal cascades, which is pretty typical, right? So at the top, somebody sets the strategy, or the leader set the strategy, the executives do that, and then the everything cascades down. The problem with that is that literally cascade means it flows top to bottom. It never flows bottom to top. And that means the perspectives of the people that are doing the work, that are interfacing with your customers, that's all lost in the process. And it assumes that a few people at the top are the wise persons that have all the information and are able to come up with all the scenarios. That's why they're paid a bit big bucks, right? But the smart leaders and the companies that do it well, they have more something that we call an open strategy, where they have a process of involving as many people as possible in figuring out what the next big thing needs to be for the company, and they're able to get people to shape the strategy, and that creates an enormous upside in execution, because now people are already aware of why it's important. They've either co-created it or they've been able to give input, and the chances of that strategy being able to execute that strategy just goes up a lot because of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny how often you'll see somebody who's on the front lines doing an actual job. They have the best knowledge of what that job is
Yeah,
like because they're doing it every single day.
exactly.
So somehow somebody, four floors above that's never set foot in that department is supposed to know intuitively like what
Yeah,
works better. That never made sense to me, but it
yeah.
is the way a lot of places work. So in many organizations, decision making is painfully slow.
Mm-hmm.
There's a ton of wasted time. Is it because nobody wants the responsibility of the decision, or why is that?
Couple reasons. One reason is that indeed we are afraid to make the wrong choice, and maybe there has been a culture of maybe there was a mistake once, and a leader said this may never happen again, or maybe people were fired because of a wrong mistake. Well, that creates a pattern that will just perpetuate for sometimes for years, because the story is you cannot make a mistake here. Like, that is really painful. So that's one reason. The other reason is that sometimes we haven't clarified with each other who actually owns what types of decisions, and we just assume that because we don't know, we have to ask and involve this person and that person and trying to get everybody on the same page, and just that creates meeting after meeting after meeting. And with the lack of clarity around decision-making rights, you get a lot of noise. Third reason is that we treat every decision as if it's an irreversible decision. We don't really distinguish different types of decisions before making them. We are not really intentional with that. And it's one of my favorite things to talk about, actually, when it was a blog post by James Clear who made it really nice description. He said, decisions are like, there's only three types of decisions. There are hats, haircuts, and tattoos. So if you can buy a hat, and if you don't like the hat, you can bring it back, or you can quickly buy a new one, right? You don't have to live with that for long if you're wrong. If you're gonna get a haircut, oftentimes within a few weeks, if it's a bad haircut, it grows back, and you can maybe feel ashamed for a while, but it's not that long that you have to live with the consequence of the decision. Which also means that you don't have to overanalyze taking the right haircut. You don't have to figure out all the possible barbershops and all the possible haircuts and analyze and again and again and again and ask for more information and ask more suppliers who could possibly be. No, you just go and have it, and it's going to be okay. But the third type of decision is the tattoo, which means that you're going to live with the consequences for much longer. So this could be, I don't know, a rename, a rebrand of the company. It could be an acquisition. Could be big decisions that are just huge investments, for example, that are just very difficult to reverse. For those types of decisions, it makes a lot of sense to take the time and to integrate everybody's perspectives and get more information to make sure you're right. For all of the others, so often you don't even know what the haircut is going to be, how it's going to feel, or what it looks, what the hat is going to look like until you do it, until you buy it, and until you have it. So sometimes we just have to take action for us to understand what is the right direction, rather than analyzing if we should take the action or not. Because so often we also forget that the cost of not making a decision is compounding. The cost of dragging your feet just building up. And anyway, so those are some hot takes on decision making.
I love that. I mean, I think it's a fascinating perspective, and it's so true, and yet it is so common. I talk to so many entrepreneurs that are making a decision about something that ultimately, in the grand scheme of things, you could change on a dime if you needed
Yeah.
to. And they agonize over it. They're, oh, I don't know if this is, look, if you try and it doesn't work, next week you could just shift it to something else. I understand if you're using your entire budget to acquire a new company, like you said, that's a big deal because that can put you under if it's a mistake. But if you're talking about whether to use blue or whether to use purple in, this particular ad campaign, just give it a shot.
Yeah.
One of the other things I always say about that, and particularly in terms of marketing, is you can talk to this marketing person in the world. Nobody really knows the answer.
Exactly.
Anecdotally, all the things that typically have worked in the past. You have this data bank of information, and you know strategically and statistically what should work. When you put a headline on a page, the best copywriters in the world, in the history of the world, have said, I thought this one headline was going to crush it, and it was mediocre. This other
Yeah.
headline that I threw in as a joke killed it. I've had that same experience personally. I've written 3, 4 headlines to split test, and I thought, oh, these are gems. And the last one I just added just to have another one outperform them all. And there you go. You end up feeling like, okay. But I mean, there's value in the information and the data and the history.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there's no certainty with it. The market's going to
Yeah.
tell you what it wants once you put it out there. And so
Yep.
that's
Yeah.
a
100% true.
fascinating take, though. I love
And we
that
have to
whole
just
thing about decisions.
And we just have to
Go for it.
acknowledge the complexity that we're dealing with. There's a lot of theory about complexity and types of problem spaces, and we often deploy solutions that are really good for complicated things, where it's like we can know how this works and we can fix it, but you cannot plan your way into becoming the number one app in the App Store, right? You have to experiment, you have to try, and if you fail to get really good experimentation and learning, then you won't be successful.
Yeah, I agree completely. I mean, I think the biggest job of a lot of business owners and entrepreneurs anyway is sort of problem solving, right? We're like professional
Hmm.
problem solvers. Whether the problem is a good problem or a bad problem, we're always trying to figure out the way to get to the cheese when it's stuck at the other end of the maze in that one way or another. So there's a lot of focus these days on speed. Obviously with the internet, everything has just been accelerated. Now you got AI. So everything is moving faster and faster. I live in an area where you can feel the intensity. It's palpable
Hmm.
from the time that kids are in school, what colleges are they going to get into, all that other kind of stuff, the intensity, the speed. Is speeding up your organization always a good idea?
You're asking this the right person, I think. My first book was subtitled "How to Reach Extreme Acceleration in Your Organization." Um, Funny enough, so I've been inspired by the world of Formula One motorsports a lot in terms of management practices. It's a fast-moving business. It's the biggest team sport in the world. An average team is about 1,000 people. So and they're somehow able to make decisions really quickly, be highly innovative, and improve themselves week after week. And what's interesting about companies like Formula One teams and other organizations that are fast and innovative is that yes, they are quick, but they are quick because they pause and reflect a lot. And funny enough, in our Western business culture, sitting down and talking about what went well this week and what didn't go well this week feels like a waste of time. We don't have time for that. It doesn't feel urgent enough to have that conversation. But the fact of the matter is, if you don't do it, you'll never get better, and you keep being super busy, and you're gonna keep wasting time and energy on things that always feel urgent. You never get out of the trap of urgency versus importantness, right? So the best companies have, and the best organizations have, reflection built into their rhythms. So it's a meeting, or most of them don't even call it a meeting. They call it a ritual or a ceremony, where it's already on the schedule. Every month or every 6 weeks, there's a 2-hour block on the schedule, and that's the time where we're going to talk about team improvement. It's non-negotiable, meaning that if, I don't know, a leader or a key person in the team is not there, we're not going to move this meeting. It's just going to happen at this schedule. And we're always going to use a fixed structure to go through it, meaning we're going to take some time individually to reflect. We're going to pick a few questions like what went well, what didn't go well, what can we improve next time? And we just go through that every time. And that really creates a cadence for reflection and also for calmness, because now if there's something building up, maybe there's a tension building up either between people or frustration that's happening with the team, we already have something on the schedule that allows us to ventilate that and to empty the bucket, so to say. And we don't have to do the momentous lift of when you're super busy trying to figure out what's a good time to put in a 2-hour session, right? Because that's never going to happen. So yeah, reflecting at the past, doing these retrospectives is extremely important for companies to be able to deal with the speed that they need to have.
Now, I like that perspective, and I have to say, it's funny to me because I think intuitively we kind of all know this. In
Mm.
our own personal lives, we've had moments where we are running really fast, trying to solve a problem. We can't figure it out. Then you're sleeping, you're in the shower, you're grocery shopping, and boom, it pops into your head. You're taking a walk in the park
Yeah,
because your mind can still work on it. You can still figure it out. Sometimes when you're pressing too hard, it shuts down that creativity and you're not able to take into account all of the statistics and all of the history and all the various things that you did. So it's funny to me that even still it's difficult, but it's really smart, like you said, to build that into the schedule because if it's non-negotiable,
yeah,
you have to do it. And I think like a lot of things, it might be a little weird for people initially, but once you get used to it, I'm sure it's cathartic. I'm sure it's a great experience to go through because
yeah,
then you also get to feel like you can reset each time and you're not always running so thin that there's no reserves left
yeah,
because ultimately it's people or companies or whatever else. It used to crack me up because I was been in a sales culture a couple of times in my career, and at least in the United States, the way the sales cultures work, I don't know if you've studied the sales function that much, but one of the big things is when you're coming up to the end of the month or a quarter, the boss always tells you, okay, we just have to push really hard because we're coming to the end of the quarter and we've
yeah,
got to, make sure that we hit. And I would always turn to my buddies and say, so wait a minute, after the quarter ends, is he going to tell us now you can take it easy for a few days? Oh, no, no, no. As soon as the quarter ends, the conversation is, well, now we've started a new quarter. We've got to hit the ground running so we can
yeah,
break the record for. And I'm thinking to myself, what you're basically saying is put the accelerator all the way down, always have it totally redline. At some
yeah,
point, like your Formula One analogy, right? The car's going to break down.
yeah,
You've got to do maintenance. You've got to be able to slow it down occasionally. And
yeah.
so,
You have to cool the
it
brakes. Yeah.
yeah, amazing. I mean, but it's true how that always works. So let's talk about strategy for a minute. I know so
Hmm.
many companies have a vision, they have a strategy, and it sounds good on paper, but they struggle to bring it into reality. Why is realizing a strategy so hard for a lot of companies?
Yeah, there's a couple things. When you talk with leaders, they sometimes tell me, well, it's our people, right? They somehow don't get it, and I've explained it a couple times, and they're still doing other things. That's a pretty naive view, of course. I think it's always the leader's fault if their strategy is not somehow realizable, and often it's the strategy itself that's flawed. If you go and look at an average strategy deck, I have seen hundreds of them over the years, but often they are very fluffy. They're trying to be everything. They're made in a conference room where everybody had to feel good about it, which means in the end it means nothing. It's these words on a slide where it's like, we're going to do everything for everybody and also make money for shareholders and be good to the planet or whatever it is. But if you then go to talk to a frontline worker and you say, hey, here's the strategy. What do you think? What are you going to change about your job after reading the strategy? They're like, looks a lot like last year's deck, right? There's literally nothing that is really creating any focus. So strategy itself needs work. That means, and there's a good book. I mean, I write about it in my book, but there's also a book by Richard Romold called Good Strategy, Bad Strategy. And that's all about understanding that strategy is, first of all, understanding your situation really well. What is our company facing? What are the obstacles that we need to overcome to be good? And then picking a set of coherent actions that are allowing you to create a winning advantage in a certain playing field, which also means that you can be wrong. So going back to your earlier question about why are we stuck in slow decision making, well, you have to be courageous enough to pick a strategy and acknowledge that it might be completely wrong, and you have to live with those consequences. Because if you're not going to pick anything, you're not going to focus the energy of the organization to get to that specific outcome. So that's the first thing. And the other thing is, I already talked about it, is doing strategy self-alignment and integration. So taking that strategy, going to department A, B, and C that are involved and saying, you know what, this is what we really want to do in the next 2 to 3 years, not in 1 year. Like, let's stop doing this annual planning. It's crazy. We need to go and look a little bit further out, 2 to 3 to 4 years out. And we go and have conversations with every department and say, you know what does that mean for the marketing department in terms of capabilities that we need to build? What does it mean for software development? What does it mean for finance? Where do we need to close some gaps? And then you can get coherent action across the organization toward this focused set of outcomes that you're looking for.
Yeah, that's powerful, and I think it's super important, obviously, because I mean, having a strategy that actually people are sort of rallying around is going to be a lot more useful, really, than not. I mean, you might as well not have one at all, otherwise,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it's words on a page. I've seen that with the mission statements and this and that, and it's not, the idea of it isn't bad. It's just that if it's all just either superlatives, so it's too
Yeah.
general to mean anything, or if it doesn't involve the people that are actually, like you said before, the cascade effect. If it's top down and you're trying to push the thing downward, those people aren't bought into it. They're
Yeah.
just doing their job and want to go home at the end of the day. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, so yeah, that's funny. So teamwork. Let's talk about teamwork a little bit too,
Yeah.
because as I mentioned before, I've worked in high performing teams, and I've worked in those teams where you know that everybody's trying to do as little as they can. You feel like you got to do it all or nothing happens.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it's obviously a really important element, though, in organizations to run well and be productive. Are there secrets to building high performing teams and optimizing teamwork?
Yeah, there's a lot of things you can do. One thing that I really like talking about is something called uh, radical alignment, and that's a practice from Bob Gower and Alexandra Jamieson. They wrote it in their book, and it's ICBD, and it's literally a 4-part conversation that you can have with a team that creates alignment, creates empathy, and accelerates the team development cycle that you always have. I mean, if you go and join a team, you have to somehow figure out how everybody works. What are the unwritten norms here? Why are these people behaving this way? Like, we're trying to figure that out. So anytime somebody joins or leaves a team, or anytime a team goes on a new initiative, it's good to have this 4-part conversation. And it goes as follows: it's 4 simple questions that everybody in the team answers for themselves and then shares the answers with the others. The first one is intentions. The I from ICBD. So why are you part of this team or initiative? What is your intention with showing up here and doing this work every day? What's in it for you? The C is for concerns. What concerns do you have about this work? What might go wrong? What are you afraid of? Let's put that all on the table right now. So we all know from each other, like, what worries us. Boundaries. What are your personal boundaries, or what are rules that we should put in place with each other to work well together? And then D is dreams. What do you know, if this goes incredibly well, what might be possible? What might be true if it goes super well? And if you put those things on the wall or digitally, you share your answers. It's a 1 hour or 90-minute exercise. It really accelerates understanding, and it creates a very rich conversation about the work and all the possible things that might go wrong, and what might be possible if it goes well. And from there, you can create working agreements. So given that we all know this, what are some patterns we see? Apparently, everybody's worried about the same thing. What's something we might do to address that? Apparently, we all find it important to have the time to relax in the weekend. Well, maybe we can put a boundary in place that we try to not call each other in the weekend. Those kind of things you can do as a team.
That's great. And I love the idea of not just hoping that it works because you get the right people together,
Right.
but because you're deliberately setting out to create this high performance thing where everybody has buy-in. Because in my experience anyway, and I obviously haven't studied this the way you have, but in my own experience, anytime I've been in an organization, a team, or anything else where I felt as though my opinion and my ideas mattered and were valued,
Mm-hmm.
I just inherently had more connection and more drive to want to do my best, just inherently in, as who I am.
Yeah.
You know, if I feel ignored and what I want or care about and my ideas don't matter, then it's hard to buy into anything else
Yeah.
because we all want to feel like we matter and are important in that way. So yeah, I can see the value in that for sure. So your new book, Unblock, Clear the Way for Results and Develop a Thriving Organization. The title seems to give a lot away,
Yeah.
but I'm going to ask you anyway. What's it all about, and what's the key takeaway?
Yeah. Unblock is a practical guide for leaders that are ambitious and have a certain result in mind, but somehow have experienced that their organization is not set up right to get it done. And it offers all sorts of practical things to try, include, like, for example, the thing I just shared about ICBD. It's full of those ideas. And it covers 6 main topics. We already talked about a few: strategy, steering, decision making, ownership, teamwork, and meetings. So with those 6, you cover a lot of what work looks like every day and what might be problematic. It allows leaders to skip over the chapters that are not relevant to them. So it's very modular. So it's like, you know what, I'm really suffering from meeting overload. Let's just dive in there immediately and skip the other parts for now. That works with that book, and it covers everything I've learned from doing it in the last 10 years with leaders and trying to improve their organizations all across the world.
Awesome. Yeah, it sounds like a must read. So, where can people find you, your products, your services?
Yeah. Yeah, so the book is on Amazon, or you can get more information on unblockbook.net. And I'm very active mostly on LinkedIn. So if people punch in my first and last name in LinkedIn, connect, follow, and you'll find more about me and the services of our company.
Excellent. Thanks for that. All right, I have one last question. I have to ask this because I'm always curious what everyone's going to say, and that's what's your number one tip for success as a business owner or an entrepreneur?
It's about picking your own boundaries, being very intentional with them, and finding ways to put them into practice and live by them by reflecting all the time.
I like that. Very succinct. You're really good at encapsulating things and giving good summaries and everything else. So it makes all of the things you say actionable and very useful, which is awesome. So it's great advice. Thanks a lot for that. All right, with that, it's just about time to wrap things up. I want to thank you again so much, Jurriaan, for sharing all of your insights and great tips with us. Visit unblockbook.net to learn more about his services, how he can help, and get his new book. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. And as always, remember, no matter what you want for your business and your life, don't compromise, optimize.